Call the meeting back to order.
Okay, I'll do the oath. I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give to this honorable legislative assembly shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Good afternoon, Mr. Barnes, and thank you for coming. And let me express my gratitude for you, particularly coming at such short notice without a formal summons. That was very much appreciated. Otherwise, we would probably have to have an extra meeting next week. So that's really appreciated. We're dealing with the Maritime Authority of the Cayman Islands accounts for June the 30th, 2016, and we have a couple of questions for you as chairman of the board, mostly to do with governance and stuff like that. So, Mr. Saunders.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and through you, sir. And Mr. Barnes, I also want to express my gratitude for you making yourself available today. One of the things that we are trying to achieve on the Public Accounts Committee is more on the governance side, to make sure that the boards, and especially on the statutory authorities that are running these multi-million-dollar organizations, that the boards at least have some level of governance over the day-to-day management. We noticed that the financial statements were also signed by U.S. Chairman of the board, and what we want for the public to understand is the governance model or the governance structure that you and your board use to basically manage your operations. So if you can just briefly just tell us what the frequency of the board meetings is, what it is that you guys generally look at, and what subcommittees, if any, there are that the board has to ensure that the management is actually being managed properly or watched properly. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, the board consists of 7 individuals, and thank you. Philip Antonio Barnes, Chairman, Maritime Authority of the Cayman Islands. Right, in response to your question, the board consists of 7 members. We meet regularly, at least 6 meetings throughout the year, staggered throughout the year. We also have an Audit and Finance Committee, and its function is to review the management accounts in a very detailed fashion, taking into account the results against budgets and the variances, and seek an explanation for those variances. I also like to add that on a monthly basis, management presents those management accounts to all board members, which is circulated. Now, in terms of our governance, MESA produces an annual corporate document which is approved by the board, and it is reviewed quarterly, and for which reports are given to the board. The budgets are approved annually and reviewed monthly. And here again, we utilize the Audit and Finance Committee, which comprises 3 board members who are knowledgeable and capable to make that function effective and efficient. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, we'll have a follow-up. So
Sure.
yeah, that's fine. Okay, the Audit and Finance Committee, is that one committee or is it 2 committees?
1 committee.
Okay, from an operational standpoint, because one of the things that governance entails heavily is risk. And the finance and audit is one part of the risk, but in terms of operational, which will include IT and HR, or those risks managed from the board?
Okay, the board approves the HR manual, and whenever there are any subsequent amendments to it, it has to get board approval. Now, I would also like to mention that under the law, the board gives a directive to the chief executive officer to carry out the day-to-day functions and the management of the authority. But the board gets regular reports at the board meetings of any activities and or the results of operations at that time.
Sorry, just continue on. The reports that the board get, is it a standard report, and is it broken down into different sections, where at least each section is completed by at least one senior manager, or does the standard reporting works?
Okay, at our board meeting, the chief executive officer, along with senior management, report on various sectors of the business, which they have direct involved with. Having said that, the CEO has the overall responsibility, as we've given him the directives to run it and accountable to us.
I just have a couple of questions, not specific to this, but we want to get a certain message out to other board chairmen as well as yourself. You are aware of the public authorities law that came into effect on the 1st of June last year.
That's correct.
And the other Section 47 comes into effect on the 1st of June this year, which is the one that talks about salaries.
Correct.
Which places a lot more or more defined responsibility on board chairman in particular and board members in the broader sense. Has your board been active in making sure that there is compliance to this legislation?
Yes, the board is aware of it, and we have, by utilizing our audit and finance committee, who have assisted us in a more detailed manner of it. But yes, and going forward is something that we'll definitely use as part of our governance to ensure that there is complete compliance with it.
Yeah. Earlier we had invited the CFO to the as a witness.
Yes.
Mr. Osbert Francis. Now, unfortunately, when we invited him, he did not respond and tell us that he was not the chief financial officer, right? Because apparently there was a restructuring in October last year.
Correct.
Which would have been post the coming into effect of the Public Authorities Law, where they created a number of positions. Yeah. I just want to, if you could confirm that the board is fully aware of those changes that were made.
Yes, indeed. During our board meetings, we were given that report, and in the case of Mr. Francis, it was not a new position, but merely an extended role, for which there have been a number of title changes that the board is aware of and have approved.
Yeah. And he also indicated that he doesn't have a professional accounting qualification, nor does the head of accounting or finance under him has any have a professional accounting qualifications.
That is correct, and I believe that the period we're looking at, the person who prepared the financials are no longer with Macy, but at that time, that person reported to a CPA, who has, because of the internal structure, and has now moved on to another role. But and I say that to say, he also has, as senior management, an opportunity to scrutinize those accounts even before it goes to our audit committee. So we find comfort in the manner in which the financials are prepared to be fair. And of course, by the time it reaches the auditors, we rely on their opinion.
Okay. And the board is comfortable that in those reshuffling, right, you don't have that JD no longer requires a professional qualification to be head of finance or head of accounting or the global director responsible for finance.
I think that the position will certainly review the position if it becomes necessary. But at the moment, we're comfortable that the effectiveness of the person doing the role has been satisfactory.
Okay. Of course, this will come up in the accounts that are going to be audited now.
Yes.
But it's just because we were surprised and a bit disappointed in that we were not told when we invited him as chief financial officer that he was not the chief financial officer and that there was no longer a chief financial officer because we had certain professional related accounting questions which we now have unanswered because we didn't believe that he was in a position to answer them. But that'll come up, of course, in greater detail in the 2016-17 accounts. I just wanted you to be aware of that and to confirm to us that you were aware that the changes were being made.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, sir. I just want for the public to understand that while it's good to have a CPA or a qualified accountant preparing the accounts, the real emphasis is to make sure that the person who's checking the accounts is actually qualified to do so. Because there are many organizations and entities where the persons who prepare the financials aren't necessarily CPA. One of the things I'm just a little bit curious about, Mr. Chairman, is that for an organization that's doing roughly over $9 million a year in revenues, in this day and age where you have more like the governance where you have a chief operating officer, a chief financial officer, and a chief executive officer, that finance itself isn't as a major risk in terms of for organization of this size. And ultimately, there's a board decision, but I would strongly recommend that from the board standpoint that in covering risk. Now, it could depends on the operation itself, but at least have that conversation, even with the Auditor Generals per se, from a risk management standpoint, and look at a structure where at least for almost $10 million a year revenue business that you have at least a qualified person looking at it. Now, we have seen in the last 2 days some entities are quite small, and we wouldn't necessarily push on them or encourage them to have a CPA because we know it can be quite expensive. But for an organization of this size, you would at least think, and especially the broadness of it, you would at least expect that finance would have been a little bit more, a little more emphasis placed on finance. But ultimately, that is a policy position, and this is something that is outside the remit of this committee, because our job is not really to look at policy, but just more from an accountability standpoint. One of the other questions that I would like to pose is that one of the issues, one of the questions that we did have was the financial statements as well. With financial statements that was not prepared within the legal time limit. And that is one of the things I would just remind yourself as chairman ultimately that it is a requirement by the law. There's no leeway the law set certain dates, and then also the supporting schedules and the other stuff that goes with the audit to make it efficient. Those are also late. And I think at a minimum, yourself ultimately as the person who signed at least needs to be made aware that, and this is where the audit subcommittee comes in now from the board, whereas there need to be access that if the stuff isn't going to the auditors as quickly as they should, when 9 out of 10 times most of the information that the auditors require are stuff that should be on record, that in itself raises flags. Now, nonetheless, the audit opinion is qualified for a different reason, but from an operational efficiency governance standpoint, that is something in making sure that the proper schedules and information that should get to the auditors get there. Because ultimately, it would just naturally raise flags, because if someone should have something ready and is not readily available, then questions naturally will arise. This is not to say anything out there is untoward, but from an efficiency standpoint, for a $9 million organization, we would expect a little bit more from that standpoint. So I just wanted to make you aware that ultimately, as the chairperson of the board.
Well, thanks for that. I certainly take that into consideration.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Barnes. And again, we want to express our gratitude in you coming at such short notice. That's really appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we finished our work for the day, so the meeting will be adjourned, and our next meeting will be at 10 a.m. March the 6th for us to consider the 3 or 4 reports that we hope to table in the next sitting of the Legislative Assembly. I want to thank everybody for making the time to come, and I can tell you it's a real pleasure to be chairman of the Public Accounts Committee when all members turn up on a regular basis to attend meeting and participate. I have been here on other occasions when it was a lonely job, and the only person who read the report of the membership was me. So it's a pleasure to work with you all, and that you come so well prepared and questions. So thank you all very much, and we're now off here. Thank you.